Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 67th episode of Beyond Talking Points with Matt and Matt. Um, we're taking another break from the Michael Malice's Anarchist Handbook to talk about a movie that Matt was trying to get me to watch for a while, and I just put it off and put it off, and then I was bored one night and I decided to watch it. It's called Midsommar. Um, I assume we'll be spoiling bits of it. So if you don't want anything spoiled, then I wouldn't recommend you watch this video. You can watch it, of course, after you've seen the movie. I guess I'll go over. Can I go over brief plot points quickly, or?
Well, I would just jump in to say the movie's been out for 2 years, came out summer 2019. So I don't feel bad about excessive spoilers, but it is a movie. Like, I've been nagging Matt to watch it for a reason. It's an atmospheric horror movie that's really good. I'm doing a quick pitch for the movie. So if anybody's listening to this and has been thinking about watching it, I'm saying you should watch it. It's kind of long, but I'm a guy who watches a lot of movies, and I don't really like those light horror movies. I like the atmospheric, dark ones that are kind of unsettling and not necessarily just because they're graphic. And this movie is kind of a love it or hate it movie in a lot of ways. So I think people should watch it whether they know they'll like it or not. So that's my elevator pitch for it. Especially, I don't think you've seen The Wicker Man, but that's a good analogy to it. It's like a very updated version of that. And we kind of have to spoil the hell out of it in order to discuss a lot of things in it or to make different points. So we're going to. So, you've been warned. But you should watch it.
So the movie centers around a group of friends. Well, particularly one person, a young woman, a psychology student, I believe she is, named Danny, and her sister killed herself and her parents. We don't know why. I guess she was mentally. It's not really that part's not really explored. I assume she's like mentally ill or something, really struggling. Sending her sister a lot of emails, very like disturbing emails. So her sister fills their parents' home with carbon monoxide. Everybody's killed, and on top of that, Danny's having a difficult time with her boyfriend Christian. He's kind of like wanting out of the relationship, but he doesn't. He seems to me to be torn about it. Like he wants out, but he's also afraid he's going to regret leaving, and he still feels kind of a connection with Danny, I think. So there, but Danny can tell obviously that he's not fully invested in the relationship, and so basically, she finds out that Christian and his friends Josh and Mark, Josh and I think it's Josh and Christian are anthropology students, and they're going to a community in Sweden, to a Scandinavian community, to kind of just observe the practices there. I think for Josh's thesis, if I remember correctly, and so of course Danny's horrified because she didn't know about this trip at all. Christian decides to convince his friends for her to tag along, and she does, and basically everything goes to hell in a handbasket from there.
Yeah,
would you like to jump in here?
I think that's the most basic general overview. It touches on so many things. I think the thing that might be a good place to start, and where you might not have a lot of thoughts on it, but it's just because I kind of disagree with your characterization of Christian a little bit, and I think this is one of the more this is one of my I think might be one of the reasons why the movie's most striking to me. You and I are both young guys. We're both in our lower 20s, right? And I think Christian was and this is a little bit less. I think a lot of this episode is going to be us talking about themes in the movie, but we're also going to just be doing some reactions to the movie in terms of just like general criticism. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt. But I thought Christian was one of the best characters in any movie in the sense that I thought it was impossible to not hate Christian every single moment of the movie that he was in. He is pretty much the most cowardly person that could possibly exist in the context of the 2010s in our age range, because he's a coward. Because from the first moment when Danny's having this breakdown, Christian is essentially talking to his friends about how he's too much of a wuss to just break up with her. and everything he does is kind of the minimum a boyfriend can do for a girl. And it's not that like I'm being a simp and saying guys should try really hard. It's more of like he is like, his girlfriend knows that he doesn't really love her. He's just too much of a coward to take that step. And this is like something that I think should resonate with a lot of people our age, because it's what people do a lot, where and this kind of plays to our generation's nihilism a little bit, and a lack of commitment, and like a lack of maybe aspirations towards a traditional family at a young age. But there is clearly, like, Christian and Danny, there's no way they'd ever get married. There is not any type of passionate love there. It's just kind of like lingering for the sake of it. And throughout the movie, he is tempted to do things that are at Danny's expense, and he eventually, succumbs to a ritual where he, it's hard to put into words, because the ritual is really graphic if you say that and you've seen the movie. But he ends up, procreating with one of the people in the village, right? And it's all part of this huge ritual, and it's because he is such a pathetic person. And even to spoil more, but in the end, when he's chosen by Danny to be a sacrifice, the one of the elders, like, before he lights everything on fire, says something along the lines of like, now you can reflect on your wickedness. And I think it's like a testament to the passive cowardice of that character, and how like truly despicable that is, even though it's not like active evil. It's more of like this really gross passive negligence. And that really strikes me every time I watch the movie. Like, he's somehow worse every time I watch the movie. So I wanted to correct that, and then also get your reaction on that, because I don't know if you agree with me there.
No, I definitely disagree with you there. Because watching this movie, almost all the characters, there were a few minor characters that the audience didn't have, at least I didn't have enough of a connection to feel anything but complete indifference towards. But for all the main characters, and including some of the members of the cult, I had this experience where, I felt both a disgust with them and a profound empathy with them. So to take Christian as the example we're talking about here, I was about to say a word we're not supposed to say on air, but he's a jerk. He's gaslighting Danny. He's not giving her the respect she deserves. If he were a friend of mine and I saw this relationship, I would take him aside and be like, man, you have to end this. Like, this is ridiculous. You can't behave this way. You're a grown adult, and she deserves better. And of course, there's also the added like layer of difficulty, that Christian's friends don't respect or like Danny either. So like he has, there's this negative I guess feedback cycle. Is like he feels trapped in the relationship. His friends are kind of being overly dramatic about it, you could say, and that makes him feel even more like stuck and like feel like he's a victim. So I'm not excusing, or I can't excuse his behavior as Danny's boyfriend, but I didn't have a profound hatred towards him. I felt like he was. It's particularly in the beginnings of the movie, where like they were like the movie was setting up the kind of relationship Danny and Christian had. I felt very uncomfortable with those scenes. I have if this doesn't sound like I'm virtue signaling, if I'm like watching a movie and there's like a woman, and there's like a couple and the man's disrespecting his wife, his girlfriend, those scenes just really bother me extremely. But somehow I still found a way to greatly empathize with Christian. And I still got the sense that, because with the first scene he's in, minus the time when Danny's talking to him on the phone, the first time we see him on screen, I didn't get the sense he was like, yeah, I hate this blankety blank. She's terrible. I didn't get the sense that it was like malevolence. I got the sense it was I guess weakness, you could say. But that doesn't make me hate him. In fact, I think he's almost a stand-in for a lot of guys nowadays. And And if I may add a little more, because you mentioned the ending, I don't know if we want to tackle that yet, but
well, let's just stay on Christian.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I don't want to go into the ending aside from that point. Okay, so I think we actually come to an agreement. I think the only place we differ is I'm more saying I'm disgusted with him, and you're more angling at you can empathize with him. I think I'm disgusted by him because of what you said, because I think he is a very easy character to empathize with. I think he's a stand-in for something that is very real, and I think it is not malevolent. I think it's just like the embodiment of cowardice in like our generation, and especially in relationships. And I think that's a really, really bad thing. And it kind of outlines how there is a heart of a good intention to being afraid to do that, because he knows it'll hurt her, knows it's like she needed him. That's why he hadn't broken up with her, because even before her family, all dies, he kind of is saying she freaks out about this stuff all the time. So it is empathizable, but he's clearly a coward in like a way that is unsettling and gross and very real. So it's like he's almost such an amazing villain because he isn't cartoonishly villainish. He isn't a cult sacrificing people for the sake of a ritual. He's a real person, and tons of those exist. And that's something that people should be ashamed of for acting that way. And a lot of people can watch that, and a lot of guys can watch that and realize at some point in their life they've acted that way, and they should look at it and be like, I was a coward and I should not be a coward. Christian is the taken to the furthest extent that version of a coward. And that's why I'm like impressed with how it was handled. Like I feel like everything he did fell in line. And even like the PhD thing where he tries to rip off Josh's PhD topic, and then he immediately throws Josh under the bus once Josh goes missing. So all these things are just like cowardice, convenience, and gaslighting. And it's like these are like basic things a lot of people do, even without realizing it, that are self-serving. But it's a natural. A lot of people do it at least sometimes, right? So I think that's why it was so powerful to me, was because it was so real and not necessarily bad intentioned.
See, I didn't really think of any particular character in this movie as a villain. I understand why you would characterize Danny and Christian as sort of antagonists in that sense, but yeah, no, I mean, I just can't bring myself to really despise Christian. I guess I might despise his behavior, but I sort of see his behavior as a manifestation of, say, maybe a lot of cultural ills that we have in the United States, or in people's attitudes towards relationships, people's attitudes towards, I guess, morality. Or a topic that's talked about nowadays, particularly on certain circles on the internet, people's attitude towards masculinity and what it means to be a man, and how to treat your wife, how to treat your girlfriend, and whatnot. And at the same time, unless we think about the fact that he was concerning the ritual he was in, I guess I saw him as less choosing to do that and more coerced, because he was drugged. And so if we think about that ritual as purely metaphorical, I could see it as a metaphor for him cheating. So I could see it as a metaphor for him being so fed up with the relationship, but not willing to do anything to change the status quo. So he goes off and cheats, and you could see both the woman he's performing the ritual with and the women that are standing around them when they're performing the ritual. You could see them as like that, those string of women that he's like cheating on Danny with over time, because he's too much of a coward to end the relationship. But if I focus it on the universe, the movie's universe itself, then he's less culpable, from my view, due to the fact that the cult did coerce him, and he seemed to be like really like fighting the temptation, which he ultimately did succumb to. And I'm not trying to excuse that. But yeah.
I don't really think he fought the temptation. And I think this might just be an agree to disagree thing. So like technically he was under the influence of a substance, but there's like the part earlier, which I don't know if you pick up on it, but the first time the redhead girl is introduced, she did all the I think I cannot remember the tribe's name. All the people in that cult. I feel like cult's a little demeaning because it's not an overtly cultish movie, so people haven't seen it that might paint it in a way that they're
I
like
think
simple
cult's the
people.
correct word, but I'll leave that for a later part in the conversation.
Well, yeah. I agree that's the correct word, but I don't think it paints the correct like imagery. Maybe if somebody hasn't seen the movie, but all the girls are like in a line. They're kind of dancing around, skipping, and they're doing something while singing or whatever. And she kicks Christian in the back, and Christian looks up and sees her, and he like turns to Pele and says like, can anybody just join in? And then Pele, which is a funny line, says something along the lines of, "You're an American, so feel free to just jam yourself in there." And he gets up and he goes and joins. And he was standoffish a lot of the time, but it's like he was engaged and like he wasn't under the influence there. Well, unless you interpret the movie as everything's like kind of a spell. But I think he was very game for it. I think the movie sets you up to show you he's very game for all these things. So I wouldn't give him the same benefit of the doubt you are, but maybe we have to agree to disagree on that point, and it's not that important.
Well, you can stop me if this is not the path you want the conversation to go, but I think this is a good segue for a broader thought I had, because I remember you telling me you thought this was a feminist movie done right, and I didn't get there. I didn't get there, man. I wanted to, and that's why I watched it twice. Because I watched it the first time. The feminist themes didn't really jump out at me, and so I was like, I'm gonna watch it a second time to see if I can get more out of it in terms of the feminist angle. And the second time, like I said, I was able to read bits of the movie more metaphorically, and we looked at bits of the movie metaphorically. I think the feminist aspects really did come alive for me, but. Unfortunately, I think the cult theme overshadowed the feminist theme for me, so I wasn't able to appreciate the feminist theme as much as I think the director wanted me to. And what I was going to say about the ending, which I won't dwell on, but what I was just going to say is I think the ending kind of obliterates the feminist angle for me. That was like the nail in the coffin for me, where I was like, that's the director lost me here,
Okay.
because it's like. Not only does Christian pay, but so does Josh and Mark. And I guess I had this question in my mind, like, did they all deserve to die? And they were profoundly flawed characters. And again, I was disgusted with their behavior in various points in the movie. But if you asked me, did they deserve to die? I would probably say no.
I don't think that's part of the feminist
even within the
part
context of the movie.
Okay, well, the last part, I'm not sure how that ties into a way of looking at the movie as a feminist movie. So I guess I would start by saying I guess I would start by saying something along the lines of the reason why I characterize it as a feminist movie done right is because a lot of movies that will be pushed as feminist movies are painful to watch because that is their overriding theme. It's not subtle and it's not very creative. It's really just like it's like the Harley Quinn movie, right? It's like, look, we have an actress, Margot Robbie, who's an attractive girl who probably weighs 135 pounds or something, and she's going to beat the hell out of guys who weigh 215 pounds and are jacked. And it's like, instead of it being a movie about a woman overcoming something or like superseding certain circumstances, it's a movie. It's like, look, we made a movie where a girl's the main character and she fights guys who are clearly stronger than her, but wins. Despite, in reality that could never happen. So that's like the lazy girl power feminism, or there's a lot of like the newer 101 Dalmatians movie, Cruella. That live action movie is pretty much like, oh look, a woman has a boss that's mean, and she's like an over the top male type boss, but it's a woman, and then she's gonna have a girl boss argument with her, and then they are both trying to outplay each other. And like this very like kind of silly cliche way that almost makes feminism look as stupid as right-wing caricatures of feminism are. So the reason why I appreciated why I'd call this movie a feminist movie is it's a movie about a woman in a relationship where her partner is treating her poorly. And at first she is, she goes along with it. And she's actually, in the beginning of the movie, I don't know if you recall, but even though he's being a poor partner, she is making concessions to him. So there are scenes where they are talking and he's like gaslighting her, and she's like, no, it's okay, you can still do that. And she's making all these concessions to him, even though he's the piece of garbage. And maybe your view on her, I guess, like overcoming that relationship are hindered by your interpretation of if certain people were actually actively making choices, right? So the way I see it is by the end of the movie, she starts opening up more to Christian about how he's a scumbag. So at the beginning, she's making concessions, but she has this nightmare in the middle of the movie where it's like a dream sequence where all the Americans she's with go sneak out in the middle of the night, and then she realizes they're sneaking out. She walks outside, and then she watches them all leave her. Okay? And then she wakes up, and it's a terrible nightmare, whatever. Then what happens later is the two people from London, they leave. I put that in air quotes. And one of them is left behind by her boyfriend as far as she knows. And when she's talking, when Danny's talking to Christian later in the movie, she says something along the lines of, I can't believe, Connie got left by that guy. And then she pretty much says, I could see you, Christian, doing that same thing to me. So it's her kind of starting to stand up for herself. And even if you don't necessarily buy into the literal happenings of Act 3, figure like in a more that 1,000-foot above view, she's the one who ends up being the decision maker. She's the one that essentially sentences him to death. She's the one who decides she doesn't want him anymore. And that progression, I'm more happy with being a subtle, in a way subtle, feminist message than I am girl power feminism, which only serves right-wing purposes for propaganda and left-wing purposes for propaganda. And it's like the least intellectual garbage on the planet. That's why I would say this is a feminist movie.
So the reason I asked the question, did Mark, Josh, and Christian, deserve to die, was that metaphorical undertones, because you could see those deaths as getting rid of sort of toxic masculinity, getting rid of the male, the negative male influences in Danny's life, both Christian and Christian's friends. And you could see the cult as sort of the embodiment of the feminine. So the feminine, as you say, taking over and squashing either the masculine entirely, or squashing the the negative, perceived negative aspects of masculine.
Yeah, I don't think that's what the director's going for. I don't subscribe to that. If the director's going for that, I think that's poor, because I think he does a lot that shows that if you describe the cult as the feminine, he does too much to undermine the cult in intentional ways that make the cult look bad, right? I think that's a theme that's throughout the movie, because I think this movie actually does a good job of playing both sides of a lot of issues. And in one scene, it will make a side of a theme look very good, and then another scene will kind of throw it under the bus.
But the reason that the ending and the feminist undertones are ruined for me is not because of the, say, Christian being drugged. It is because of the cult, because the cult's brainwashing Danny. Is that's what's happening. There is a character arc, right? And I think you can see a progression, and but I feel like that progression is undermined by the fact that it's not really being done by her own free will, in the same way that Christian's not really being technically choosing to do this because he was drugged. She's not really choosing to do this because not only was she drugged, but the cult is trying to turn her into a new member. They're trying to make her feel warm and welcome, which is what cults do, right? And I use cult because of the sort of the brainwashing techniques, the psychological manipulation that the cult members are playing on Danny. But just to be clear to anyone watching this, if you decided to hear the spoilers without watching the movie, when I say cult, it's not like we're gonna slit your throat in the middle of the night if we have the slightest inkling that you disobey us. Something else I watched, because I wanted to contrast it, was one of the seasons of American Horror Story, which is called Cult. Now that season does portray a very brutal and bloody cult, but it also has a lot of feminist themes, which is why I wanted to contrast Midsommar with AHS Cult. But so it's not a cult in the sense that it's very gory and bloody and dark, in the literal sense of those words, but it is a cult in the sense that the group makes you feel all warm and welcome. But as you said, the director makes clear that there are ulterior motives going on here, which, while Danny may be getting rid of the pain Christian is causing her, I think it's at a cost to herself psychologically, which is untenable. At some level, she's like stooping down. She's like doing what the men would do. She's like becoming a man almost. Again, embodying the negative of the masculine, because the negative of the masculine was hurting her for so long, which is not really very feminist, if you ask me.
So I think this is just a disagreement of not necessarily like it's more of like how to interpret a film, not how to interpret the literal facts of the ground of the film. So in a way, I watch the movie and I see a lot of themes, but I don't necessarily see the intersection of those themes. Or in some ways you can read them, but then the message gets cloudy. So like I think what you're saying is the message is more cloudy if you take all these other things into account, which is fair. I just think the movie's touching on a lot of things, and when it comes to the cult gaslighting Danny, it's like that's fair. But I do think Danny, on her own accord, would have still gotten rid of Christian because they showed that Christian is kind of the worst. So even though like the cult is also bad, I don't think that really invalidates her choice at the end. And you know, and you can bring up you can bring up his friends, right, and how they're sacrificed. But I don't really think that was intended to also serve the feminist message. I think that's more to serve other messages in the movie, because she didn't pick them to die too, right? Those people already died through other actions that she wasn't aware of. At those points in the films. So I think I agree with what you're saying. If I was choosing to incorporate those parts into my analysis, it's like you're not wrong. I just don't think that actually reckons with the art the way it's given. But I think that's like an agree disagree. Like I can see how you get there, and I don't like hate what you said, and I don't think anything you said was wrong. I just don't think those parts of the movie were meant to service that theme. And I think it's like inconvenient if you choose to apply it that way, but I don't think it was meant to. So like, you know, that's fair.
Well, I think I'm glad I watched the movie, and I got a lot out of it. But I did think that the director was trying to tackle so much that I'm not sure he needled the thread properly. But as an aside, at some level, I think I'm a bad person to talk to. I'm not a qualified person to talk about this movie, and I'm not a qualified person to talk about this movie for the reason that. I think revenge is a very natural human instinct. Like it's just kind of something programmed into most people. It's not something that just like the worst serial killers or the worst criminals in the world have. And I just, for whatever like idiosyncrasies or like environmental factors or whatnot led me to be this way. I'm just never sympathetic to like revenge narratives within fiction, within books, within movies. So generally that always ends up turning me off. It's and it's not like it's not that I'm not able to empathize with it, but it is that my experience of the world and my experience with my relationship towards, or my relationship towards other people feels so different that I don't have quite the same feelings that most people do. Which is why, you know, we did a while back an episode on the death penalty. And one reason it's so easy for me to be against the death penalty is I don't feel that murderous rage of like, we have to kill this murderer because he murdered somebody. So I realize that's not like, and this is why so many critics, I think, said the ending was a happy ending, right? Because again, whether you think about it literally or metaphorically, Christian, who behaved very terribly throughout the movie, is gotten rid of. Either, you know, metaphorically he's broken up with, he's no longer in Danny's life, or he's literally killed. But for the reason that I don't appreciate revenge themes, I did not view the ending as a happy one. I honestly, it almost felt to me like the slow disintegration of like Danny's mind. the like, and that's not to say she's not a victim, because she is, but both of circumstance and of Christian's gaslighting. But I kind of feel like all of that led her down a dark path, kind of like the the Joker, Joker going from, kind of a loser to being like one of the great criminal masterminds in history. Now that metaphor doesn't really do Danny's character justice. I recognize that she's much more sympathetic than the Joker, and she's not a villain. But that's sort of how I ended up viewing her character arc. Not so much one of her redeeming herself as her letting the darkness overtake her.
Yeah, I don't think that take is necessarily wrong. Like she definitely does deteriorate in the end because as certain things overtake her, the combination of like whatever they drugged her with and then the circumstances, right? So that's fair. And the ending is very surreal to watch. Like the last 20 minutes is just a lot to take in like a kind of extreme way. So you do have to kind of interpret that in its own like lens of how much is for artistic flair and how much is being conveyed here and there. Like there's a lot open for interpretation. I think you are onto something, but I still think the broader theme is, I think the broader theme specific to Danny is that of overcoming Christian. I don't know if I'd say it's happy ending. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit, and apologies for the cough. There was something that was interesting about it that I kind of want to run by you because it's and this is about, I guess, religion, and it's about cultural relativism and things like that. So you got to hear me out for a minute. So you and I do 4 episodes on Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. And the whole debate is essentially, can we have some level of cultural objectivism with or without religion? And when you listen to boomer cons that are religious talk, their whole idea is, well, I'm religious because obviously we all act as if there is some sort of objective morality, and that can only make sense that there's a God. And I'm not very sympathetic to that argument, but that's what the boomer cons say. So there is this very tight strain in a lot of like Western discourse in America about cultural objectivism and religion being tied together. And then you throw on this movie, right? And you got a cult of people who have all sorts of weird beliefs, and then they say things that are like very relativistic in a way, right? So there's a lot of arguments. So, there's this pretty dramatic moment in the movie. It's the movie where I think a lot of people realize how unsettling the movie is going to be, where 2 very old people commit ritualistic suicide. And that's an understatement, if there ever was one, calling it ritualistic suicide. It's like jumping off a cliff onto a rock, and then if you don't die fast enough, they hit you in the head with a mallet 3 times. And the funniest thing on the rewatch isn't that they hit him in the head with a mallet. It's that the guy gives a person a mallet, and 3 people walk up, and even though the mallet strike clearly kills him on the first one, they still do it 2 more times, because each of the people who walks up has to get one in.
I just imagined a Looney Tune sound like every time they hit his head.
Yeah, it's over the top. It's graphic. It's like so unnecessary. And there was a funny story I read when the movie came out because it came out during the summer, and I heard that scene had happened, and then the power went out in the theater, and this happened somewhere in the U.S. And then when the power came back on, finally, they replayed that part of the movie because they went back a few minutes. So like the person saw it in theaters like with their mother, and then they had to watch that part twice after the power went out. And I was just like, God, that sounds so bad. There's a lot in that movie. This movie you wouldn't want to watch with your parents, I will say. But the point is, there's this really graphic ritualistic suicide, and as the Western folk freak out, you hear a cultural relativist argument that would be made in the stereotypical American paradigm from an American leftist. That's like, well, it's our tradition. These people sacrificed themselves for the preservation of our community. They're really old. There will be new people born this year that will take their names, and this is how we work. This is the cycles we use in the culture, and I'm happy to make the same plunge when I'm that age. That is what we do, and it's okay. We all like it. So it's like funny that seeing religion and this cult tied in with this cultural relativism. I thought that was just an interesting dichotomy. I don't know if that crossed your radar much, or if you have thoughts on that.
So I was really watching the movie. Again, like I wasn't really judging any characters way too harshly. I don't think. I was attempting to like see the perspective of each and every kind of player in the chess game. But I do think this movie kind of exemplifies why I view religion as a dangerous form of collectivism, because it can give you a sense of community. It can give you a sense of purpose and meaning. It can give you that. It can help you, fall asleep at night. You're not worried about the meaninglessness of existence. But at the same time, that all that stuff it gives you can be a way to mask the destructive or negative things that religious collectives can do, because it's so easy, because of that in-group, out-group attitude, because of how close-knit people become. They feel like, oh, well, this is what the group is doing, so I need to do it. And I would try, and you trust the people when you're in your little religious group or in your cult or whatnot, because you've built that connection. And you can't really look yourself in the mirror. You can't look at your friends and family within this this dangerous collective, I'm calling it, and say like, oh, we're terrible people. We're doing X, Y, or Z because I feel so great about this. My friends and family feel so great about this. We have this such a meaningful life. But at the end of the day, it can be joining a group can be a dangerous thing indeed. But again, I'm also one of those people. I'm just not really a joiner. Partly why I'm not religious, partly why I don't join political groups or whatnot. I understand why people do join, why people are joiners. But that's just something else, a part of the human experience that just really is very different from my own.
So I want to posit a couple things and then ask the question. But in the movie, the people who are in the cult at least had the facade of being pretty happy. And I know happiness is a confounding barometer, right? So all these people are doing chores that like Americans would be annoyed to do. Like they all have to take part in all these things. And I don't want to do that. But a lot of people there seem pretty content with how their life was. So if we were able to like posit the hypothetical where they didn't sacrifice outsiders on a regular basis, and everything they did was the same otherwise, but it was internally, right? So they're jumping off cliffs when they turn 72. They're ritualistically sacrificing themselves. They're going through all these pomp and circumstance that seems really unnecessary and wasteful to us. They, put ashes over by this weird decaying tree on a ritualistic basis after people kill themselves. They do all these silly things that seem to be nothing but time fillers to us. But if it made them happy and they weren't hurting people on the outside like they are in this film, do you think that is, unacceptable? I guess that's the question I'm trying to lay out.
I mean, it's not unacceptable, I guess, because I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just pointing out the how joining groups, particularly religious ones, can lead to very destructive outcomes down the line. I mean, I have no doubt that many people in the Amish community are probably happy. It doesn't mean I think it's a good thing that they stop educating their children at the 8th grade level, and they don't teach evolution. But I can't go around telling people they can't join a commune or they can't join this little religious tribe out in the middle of nowhere. If that's what they want to do, then that's their prerogative.
I think I am a little hesitant to say anything that they did is really wrong or bad outside of the killing of the outsider folk, which is why I prefaced it in that way. Like, I still do feel like if these people are doing their weird things that we would see as backwards and like they live on the soil or whatever and they have to do all this hard work, but if they are happier because of it, I don't really see why I should be even one to say that, oh, it's bad, but I shouldn't be allowed to force them. I'm hesitant to even say that that's like, I mean, I just see so many people in my life who are nihilistic and depressed. And I'm kind of like, I'm not trying to say that we should all revert and say that this is a rule of thumb, but I guess I'm hesitant to criticize elements that are things. So I also want to add in the qualification that it's like, you and I have talked a lot about not just being ideological, but we've talked about like ideological hubris almost, or getting to the point where you are so obsessed with ideology that you do bad things. And I acknowledge that concern, but if you're in a small group and you aren't doing bad things and people are happy, then I don't want to say that's bad. even if they're not educating their kids about evolution, or even if they're teaching them things that I think are silly. I just don't see why it's bad. If their well-being is high, then their well-being's high, and that's okay.
Well, I'll give you another example. I have no doubt that many people in the Church of Scientology are also happy. Now, I use that example for an obvious reason. Scientology, many people have attempted to escape Scientology, and they've told they've written books, they've given interviews, they've told very terrible stories. So I'm only criticizing religious collectivism in whatever forms, or even ideological. I mean, if we want to expand it to ideological collectivism, I'm criticizing it because people can have a tendency to, again, try to manipulate people into joining their group, not being honest, having ulterior motives for why they want someone to join their group. So it's like the characters or the people in this little cult in the movie. It's like, yeah, they all seem happy, but I guess what I would wonder is, did they all really were they given the full knowledge of what they were doing beforehand? It's like a business that doesn't give me all the proper information so I can make the proper financial decisions. Did the cult really give the full explain everything that the cult was selling these people, or did they kind of hide some of the bad things, and then after they got the people to join, after they convinced the people that this is a great life, then they introduced all the bad things. So it's a matter of kind of dehumanizing a person, not treating them as a full an autonomous unit that can make decisions for him or herself. You're attempting to use them as a pawn for your cult or religion or what have you.
Okay, yeah, I grant all those things, and I agree with you. And I know we are calling them a cult, and I think you kind of spelled out the cult tendencies that were portrayed in the movie and how that relates to cults in real life. I am kind of trying to ask you a narrow question, and normally I give up on it, but the fact that I didn't get a satisfying answer to the more narrow question I was getting at kind of makes me want to double down on it in case you were shying away from it for some reason. So, and I like the qualification you made too, because I watched a movie recently that kind of its ending ended up setting up a consequentialist versus deontological argument, and I was frustrated with it because the only reason people would be sympathetic to that consequentialist argument the movie was making is because of how lopsided it was. It was like such a small sacrifice for such a huge payoff. And I felt like I was frustrated by it because I was like, well, yeah, it makes sense. It could make sense in this situation because that's such a huge payoff for such a small cost. But that's not how things work out in real life. Usually it's consequentialist, and it might be kind of okay for some people, maybe, but it's mixed and people argue about if it even helps. So I was really frustrated. I feel like that's kind of how you responded to my question. So that's why I'm going to double down on it. My question is more so, if you're born into a society and well-being is high and you're happy, but you're not taught things like evolution or even how to read and write, but you're happy and you're not hurting anybody, why should I judge them? And it could be into so it's not just well, they were stripped of this or they were convinced into it. It's no, they're born into it and they're happy they're there. So it's I don't think there's a good reason to be judgmental of that. And I think that's what I'm trying to say I'm sympathetic to. And I think that might be unpopular. So I kind of wanted to feel out that specific, narrow question.
Because I don't think ignorance is bliss is the short, as the snapshot answer I would give you. But to expand on that, because I don't think it's necessarily like happiness is really the only calculus we should bring into this. So it's okay, the reason I'm upset that the Amish don't teach end the education of their children at the 8th grade level is because that deprives them of the tools of certain kind of knowledge that can help them be a self-actualized person, that can help them understand the world around them. So
you're kind of saying actualization is an end, and that end is and that end is a value that you're in favor of, right?
Actualization is an end, and a lot of cults or religions or collectives end up sacrificing actualization for what is perceived as something greater, like happiness. And it's just, I think it's it's not a worthwhile bargain to take. Although I think you say your opinion's not very popular. I suspect actually quite a few people would be willing to give up a lot for a high degree of happiness. But for someone who actually like, it's why I agree with the idea that the unexamined life is not worth living. I know you're not sympathetic to that phrase, but I'm not interested in the unexamined life because then I'm cutting myself off from a whole part of life. And the reason I'm not a big joiner is often when you're joining things, that means you're cutting off other things you could be doing, or like you're assigning your identity to this group or that group, which means you can't do X, Y, or Z. So I'm for. I don't want to limit people's ability to make their own decisions and to have the broadest possible life experience that they can have. And religion generally does limit that.
So I think what you're saying is popular if we set the range to the people who actually are seeking out information, right? Like the kind of people who would actually like stumble upon an hour-long podcast talking in detail about random topics of philosophy. Those people, I think, almost universally agree with you. And because a lot of people I guess I interact with are in that space, I think I am reacting to essentially what you just said. And I think that's a popular message from people who are smarter than average. And I think it's kind of a spook to kind of bring up Stirner a little bit. But I almost think that is like a very neutral thing to say. And it implies so I think that says something, but I don't think it's saying a lot. And I think a lot of people, when they investigate life, really lean into pseudo-intellectual feelings they have, and then they broaden them out in ways that are actually anti-intellectual. Because a lot of times when people use introspection, they don't actually have somebody to push them on it. So I'm tempted to agree with you because that's how I felt a lot of my life. But in a way, I think that stuff almost makes life challenging for no reason, and it's not actually more true. So that's why I'm just kind of, I lobbed you up to say what you said because I think that's not actually right anymore. I think I've kind of backtracked on it.
So actually, well, okay, but if you ask me, like if you say, okay, Matthew, if you convert to Catholicism or Judaism, like you will be happier. Like if you can like prove, like no, I just follow the thought experiment with me. If you could prove that to me somehow, through magic or something, you have a crystal ball, and it's like I look in the crystal ball. It's like, okay, if I convert to Catholicism, I'm going to be 10 times happier than I am right now. Would I do that? No, I would not, because I don't think it's a happiness worth having. First of all, but second of all, you bring up nihilism, and I'm glad you did because the movie left me feeling very nihilistic, but it was a kind of nihilism that I was like content with, or it was kind of a nihilism that I was like willing to accept, because I think it was the kind of nihilism that kind of life in general can give you. When you're open to all the possibilities, when you have all these experiences and you try to think about issues from, every possible point of view. The movie kind of gave me a range of subject matter, say, to tackle, which maybe it might make certain people a little unhappier. But it felt more honest to me. And so at that level, I'm becoming more nihilistic because I feel like nihilism is a little more honest. And that's a part of the movie that actually I enjoyed a lot.
What parts on the ground of the movie made you feel that way? Because I guess the only thing that even seems about nihilism in the movie, in a way, is if you interpret the characters as not having free will. And I think that's an interpretation that I think you're more sympathetic to than I. But that's the only thing that I think even hints at that topic. So can you spell out more of the facts on the ground that paint why the movie's nihilistic to you? Because I've heard Republicans or conservative commentators kind of criticize this movie for being nihilistic, and I don't really feel that way.
I'm praising it for being nihilistic.
Yeah, I know, which is why I'm saying you guys have it in common. You're both saying this is a nihilistic movie. You're praising it. They're criticizing it. I don't see how. I think it's pretty neutral on that. So I want to hear why.
Well, first off, it's not because I'm saying the characters don't have free will. That's a whole other philosophical conversation we've had many times. We can have again. What I found nihilistic about it was, I think, what you're calling neutrality. Because I didn't So, well, I mean, when we talk about nihilism, this is the issue with words. It's like there's 100 different meanings of what that word. I think I could make a strong case that the movie was pretty morally nihilistic because, well, again, for my watching it, if you really despise Christian, then obviously you're kind of moralizing at that point. But from my perspective, I felt like I was watching watching a documentary that some anthropologist had like compiled. It was kind of like the movie reminded me of like Cannibal Holocaust, because it was kind of obviously taking Americans and putting them in a new culture and kind of seeing what that was like. And so for that reason, like I wasn't really necessarily putting judgment on these things. I was watching the different factors play out and kind of seeing the conclusions or the consequences of different kinds of behavior, the good, the bad, the ugly, without really coming to any one conclusion about it. I like you can't. I didn't come, watch and end the movie after I finished watching the movie. I wasn't like, oh, I'm a Kantian deontologist now because this in the movie proved to me that deontology can work, or I was a consequentialist after watching the movie. Like, no, I kind of came back from the movie. I kind of came out of the movie thinking to myself, these moral conversations aren't even worth having to some degree. They're just like, they're spooks. They're just mumbo jumbo. And we're just kind of all in this void. It's just all these human, what we think of as, all these human beings are just in this kind of meaningless void, and they're just kind of doing their own thing. So again, it resembled reality, or it resembled what I think of as the real world in a very powerful way. But I'm okay with that. That kind of nihilism doesn't really bother me. That we're like, exist in a meaningless void.
Well, I almost want to laugh a little bit because I don't feel like my question got answered that much. It was almost more like you just thought the tone of the movie was nihilistic, and it almost, and I don't mean this to be personal, but I almost felt like that what you just said kind of reflects more on you than it did the movie. That you kind of read it that way. And I know a lot of things can be said like, well, the fact that you read it this way says something about you. But I more mean it like, I don't think there's anything overtly nihilist about it. I mean, it raises a lot of questions and plays both sides of them because people do have conflicting intuitions. And it does raise reasons why their religion isn't true, right? So you have the people in the temple at the end, and then there's the two people from that society that sacrifice themselves, and they're in there when it's lit on fire and they're alive. And then the guy like puts the little thing to them, and he's like, "So you feel no pain or whatever?" And then the guy's screaming it on fire, 30 seconds later. It's kind of funny because they just told him you're not going to feel pain, blah blah, part of the ritual. So I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think it really spoke either way. I mean, sure, it was things happening to people, and it didn't talk about the cosmos, and it didn't point one way or the other. But I just don't see how that implicates life's meaninglessness or meaningfulness. And you know this, but I don't think I've said this on air. I'm very not sympathetic to the idea that cosmic meaningfulness has anything to do with your meaning in your own life. I think that's like a weird jump that a lot of depressed people make that is not bounded by any type of rational line of thought. And I was very sympathetic to that point till recently because it seems like it makes sense. But I think that's really a word game that people who feel sad don't really push back on because it plays to their feelings at the time. And I'm not sympathetic to that. And in a way, part of what you're saying plays into that argument. And I still haven't gotten any more. What you kind of said, we're just people here on this rock. And that's the cosmic meaninglessness. But I don't think that's really true nihilism when it comes to people on Earth acting. So I don't know if you feel free to respond to that.
I mean, that might maybe if you're saying that I'm not a true nihilist, then that might be it. But I guess if I'm defending nihilism, I'm not defending it in the sense that I can't enjoy hanging out with a buddy of mine. I just don't think that. I mean, we've had this conversation off air. I think it's I'm just not making any grand claims. I'm just saying, oh, I enjoyed that outing with my buddy. I don't think that necessarily invalidates nihilism, though. But I can, if you want me to give you a more, I guess, tangible reason, I said the film left me feeling very nihilistic, sort of almost in a good way, was the fact that I didn't feel like the movie was preaching to me. And I felt like it was just people well, maybe I'm repeating myself, but it was just people in this kind of space without like some like guiding force. Maybe I'm almost kind of saying like it was like it kind of epitomized a godless universe for me. If we assume like a god full universe or a universe created by God has some divine meaning to it, like it was clearly a like it's just a bunch of apes behaving the way apes do. And that's kind of what was so fascinating to me. It was again, it was like I was watching a documentary, not like I was watching a movie with like human beings with like complex personalities. It's like when you watch a documentary on Animal Planet and they follow like a group of chimps around, kind of doing things.
Well, I can kind of see that. I just disagree that nihilism follows from that, right? So I don't think a godless universe has anything to do with nihilism. I think that's the poor interpretation of nihilism that people then use to justify their own personal depression. So, but it's like I'm okay with that analysis of the movie on the ground, right? Because there's a lot of people doing things based on what they want to do. Now, I will say, as the viewer, usually when people watch documentaries, it's for an informative purpose. I mean, a lot of documentaries are very charged with an argument. So if you're knowledgeable of it, it might strike you emotionally. But I think this movie does have things that do call upon moral judgments, right? So I think it asks more from you than a documentary does. That like the whole part where everybody starts screaming, all the Americans start screaming when the people ritualistically kill themselves. Like
That's my point, though. I recognize the director's talking about moral questions, but I really came to the conclusion that in the context of the movie, moral questions didn't mean a damn thing.
Well,
they might mean something to the audience, though. I mean, if we're expanding this, I guess. But I didn't get a sense that in the universe itself, there was really, or in the movie itself, that the movie kind of came forward and said, like, this is kind of what morality is, or this is kind of how you should interpret the world. It was just kind of people behaving in certain ways and people reacting to those people behaving in certain ways and other ways. I didn't see the overarching kind of philosophy, moral philosophy behind the movie. It felt like a very amoral movie.
Yeah, and I think that's why the movie's so interesting. I don't know if you've seen Signs. Have you seen Signs? Okay, that movie definitely starts from like a point, and then the ending of the movie is definitely like, here's how this person comes back to this feeling based on their feelings of the event, how that interacts with their, I guess, moral worldview, and how that makes a change. And that movie could definitely be seen as making that claim, or at least the character had that type of fulfillment. And in this movie, the payoff. And one thing that I guess I appreciate from this movie, and I don't know if a lot of people would agree with it, but everything by the end, in my opinion, feels very inevitable and kind of obvious, even though it's very unexpected the first time. And I think that's just because it's so shocking. But the ending of movies should feel inevitable a little bit. So I think that this movie does have a payoff, but I think you're right. The payoff to this movie isn't a moral claim, right? This movie is not making a moral argument, and this is kind of what I was getting at before about cultural relativism a little bit in the religion side. So they have this part where the people ritualistically kill themselves, and I could see somebody in good faith saying, I don't think this is that bad. I don't think it's that bad that people at that age sacrifice themselves in the community, and then they kind of, hearken to Americans where they just keep themselves alive to the point where they're completely mentally deteriorated and they aren't functional, and you might as well not be alive at that point, like you're a shell of yourself. And there is something there that is very interesting. But then there's a throwaway line later where Josh is talking to the pastor, elder, whatever, and they're looking at their texts, and they pretty much tell you that a mentally disabled kid is the one who writes it. And Josh is like, when the disabled kid dies, do you wait till the next disabled kid comes along to be the new, line to God? And then the guy like laughs and he's like, no, we just make another one with incest. And it's like, obviously like the most obscene thing to the viewer. So
that's my point though about nihilism. I was talking about moral nihilism rather than say existential or cosmic nihilism. That was really my point.
Okay. Well, yeah, then I'm glad you're specifying, because nihilism is very loaded, and I don't think it was nihilism in the other sense. But I think then, like, well, the fact that it's playing both sides of the issue is honest. I don't think it has any indication on, I guess, the world, but it's fun to think about. Like, a lot of these questions are tricky, and there are some times where it's like muddy, and there are some times where we're repulsed, right? And I think there is something to that that made me appreciate it more than movies that are just bad propaganda, like girl power movies. And that's why I hate those movies so much, because they feel like bad propaganda. Even Signs, which is a movie that I enjoyed, in a way, it feels like bad propaganda for the moral worldview he's kind of pushing through the plot. This movie did not do that, and I loved that. And then that combined with the genre aspects, I appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah. It just, I again, like I said, I didn't see. I kind of like, okay, like talking about the scene with the elderly people who, the rule is in the tribe, when you reach 72, you jump off this cliff and kill yourself because you've ended the life cycle. Like, so from the tribe's perspective or from the cult's perspective, 72 is when it ends. You kill yourself, and maybe you kind of become one with nature or something. They don't go quite into that, but I didn't see that as like bad or good. I saw that event as bad or good were totally meaningless terms, and it didn't really matter. Like, I can say it's good or bad from my own like personal subjective judgment, but in the context of the movie, I thought those, like, that question itself would be meaningless.
Well, I think that's like a.
And I think the left. I think the people from England who are like repulsed by that event, and as well as Danny and her friends, I think that kind of shows you why that question is almost meaningless in the given context, because they're just kind of reacting with like ill, kind of like if you put some food that I don't like in my face, I'm gonna go like ill, or like a certain kind of music might make me like roll my eyes because I think it's a piece of garbage album. It's like it didn't. My own subjective judgment in the context of the movie, it felt like it didn't really matter.
I thought they were totally pushing the moral question. They're like, you just killed them. You can't do that. And then when they're going to do it, it was beyond just, oh, this is gross. It was like Danny didn't puke. She disassociated with her existence. She was so shocked that like the carelessness of the life. And then she has that nightmare where she sees like her sister next to those dead bodies.
No. I mean the movie. I mean the characters thought about it morally. I'm saying the movie did not.
So I just disagree then with
the characters. It was a strong moral question for the characters. I don't think it was a strong moral question for the director, or for the in the universe. From a God's point of view, I think the moral question in that particular scene, like the whole point was, it did not matter.
See,
so I've kind of like taken the cultural relativist view on that particular scene, I guess.
Well, okay. I think I need a clarifying question. We did the episode on power with Kohei, and like how I'm not sure if what you're saying is it didn't matter in the Kohei sense of it happened, so it happened, or if you're just extrapolating on the part of the conversation we had earlier about how the movie just feels godless. So, the movie is not really asking that question. It's just a godless movie, so amoral. Because I thought the movie was positing both sides of the argument that is okay, and that's like an interesting thing because it could strike people in very different ways. And there are people I know who are more cultural relativists that would say like, and even me to some extent, where I'm like, well, if they're happy doing that and they want to sacrifice themselves in that way, that's how they were raised. I'm not as judgmental as a lot of people would be. It's very shocking and it's like kind of stupid, but there is like a devil's advocate argument that isn't weak. So I see it as playing both sides, not our question doesn't matter. And you're kind of saying the movie played it as the question doesn't matter. I didn't really get that feeling.
Well, I shouldn't have said godless universe. That complicated the conversation. But I think what I'm trying to get at is perhaps why I didn't appreciate the movie as much the first time was I was expecting my questions answered. And the whole point of the movie was they weren't just supposed to be answered. That's what I'm saying. These moral questions aren't supposed to be answered. Mm-hmm. I think the movie's saying the fact that you're asking for an answer is kind of absurd, which is the moral nihilist angle.
Okay. I mean, I didn't take the lack of answer in the movie as a claim that there is no answer. which is a way of interpreting it, which is, I guess, interesting. I just took it as it's not going to put forth an answer. And it's just gonna kind of leave it as it is. And I think that's part of why I appreciated it, because everything has the urge to tell you the answer, and everything is generally like pretty mainstream in terms of narratives that I find both not appalling, but I'm not sympathetic to. So most movies that do really shove a message are either shoving like the most basic of basic family values, or they're shoving something that is like very silly, or doing it in a silly way, like the girl power movies that have been mentioned many times by me in this episode. Okay. Anything else you want to touch on this, or give some final thoughts on the movie? Or, I mean, there's a lot there, and we kind of got bogged down on a few parts. There might be other things that were in mind.
Well, I'm kind of, I think I mentioned this earlier briefly, but I do wish that the movie had been executed a little differently because I think so many issues are being tackled that it left me okay. I'm not saying the director had to give me an answer. I don't think the director should have given me an answer. That was a good thing, but I think the certain questions needed more exploration or more explanation. Exploration or explanation for me to be more satisfied as a member of the audience. I think I think he was just trying to do too much at once, and it left me for that reason. It left me somewhat unsatisfied. And I guess to put it another way, the attempt was more admirable to me than the result. I mean, I'm glad I watched the movie. I would recommend people watch the movie. But I was, I guess, less impressed with it than I expected to be. I wanted to be more impressed with it.
Is there like a specific subplot or something that comes to mind when you say that? Because I think I can see how somebody would say that. It doesn't resonate with me, though.
It's not so much one plot; it's just everything it was kind of put together in a collage, in sort of a collage. But I'm just not sure each part kind of made a cohesive whole. I felt like the whole was a little kind of off kilter.
I think that's fair. Every time I've watched this movie, I think I don't know if I mentioned it, but I've seen it 4 times now. This was the 4th time I watched it. Every time I've liked it more. Every time I've watched it, I felt more of the pieces fit together better. And maybe that's just because I'm being nice to the movie. I'm being generous. I'm not usually generous to movies, so maybe this is just has a soft spot for some reason. There's only a couple like little things that really bother me. And like even the things that are kind of shoehorned in, I almost think service other plots, and they don't really need more to them. Like Josh and Christian kind of doing their squabble about the PhD stuff. That stuff is like really... You could think of it as a C plot in the movie that doesn't get enough attention. But if you just look at it as an extension of showing us Christian's character, and then how that's a service to the Christian-Danny relationship, or just to know more about how Christian is, then I think it's serviceable. So, but yeah, there's a lot going on in the movie, and it is already a long movie. So I'm sympathetic there.
I don't know if I think you said there was a director's cut that was like 3 hours. I don't know if that if I watched the 3-hour version, if I would be more satisfied with all the plot points and feel like he covered all his bases in a longer format. But at the same time, I agree with you. At the same time, I think the movie probably could have been shortened a bit. Just cutting certain scenes out here and there, I think, or like maybe making a scene a little less lengthy could have made it more, helped me appreciate it more. When a movie gets to a certain length, you kind of like start to lose your interest, and when you do that, you can kind of miss out on certain parts of the movie because you're kind of tired or you're distracted because the movie just throws so much at you and expects so much of your time. And this is a side point, but watching after I watched it the second time, I was actually more appreciative of the little hints it gives you throughout the movie that you don't notice the first time around. Like how you notice it's like some artwork which
On the
shows you
quilts.
on the quilts, yeah, what shows you what's going to happen to Christian, excuse me, and that girl from the tribe.
Yeah. It feels so obvious the second time, every single bit, because it lingers on her so much more. And that was the other thing. The first time it shows her in the bathroom, and it has this weird rune on the wall, and that's the same rune that the old people put their blood on before they kill themselves. And it's almost like, are they trying to tell me that she's casting a literal spell? That plays into the theory that Christian didn't actually have much free will, or is this all just more, pomp? And I also am sympathetic to this movie is still kind of too long. My golden rule is if a movie is longer than an hour 40, hour 45, I usually just am annoyed. Like I'm like, this movie doesn't need to be this long, especially because of like Marvel movies perpetually being 2 hours and 15 minutes, even though they're just glorified action movies. That really makes me upset. I will never watch Endgame. It's a 3.5 hour long movie. I don't care. So yeah, I also just want to. I could say this off here, but I'm gonna say now. The director's cut. I'm under the impression it was actually shortened because they needed to get an R rating. So I think it's just more graphic in a lot of ways. And I don't know if the stuff is cut for shortening or if it's cut for this stuff is more graphic. That's part of why I'm curious, because it's not just, oh, this is auxiliary extra information. It might be more shocking stuff. So yeah, are we good? Are we good on this one? Okay. I'm surprised by how quick that time went. Usually we get bogged down in so many like political things that I feel like we cover so much, and this one was like, I think it flew by for me. But I do really love this movie as much as there are criticisms to be had of it. It's so much more than a typical popcorn movie. And the fact that like when I saw this movie the weekend it came out, I was in a completely sold out theater, like makes me appreciate it because it is an art house horror movie, and that's really rare. So yeah.
I like breaking up the podcast with occasional conversations on movies, because this isn't even really about the movie itself, but it's nice because it's a really different kind of conversation, because they're not really like broad moral principles you're appealing to. It's not really, you're not talking about like the facts on the ground for some, current political event. You're just kind of going with whatever the movie made you think or feel in the moment, and just seeing if that resonates with the other person or doesn't resonate with the person. It's more free form. It's more, I feel like there's less at stake.
Yeah.
When we're talking about politics or philosophy, it's like we're kind of looking for that capital T truth. But when we're talking about Midsommar or The Girl on the Third Floor, as we did in like episode 14, I think. So it took us a long time to get to another movie. But when we talk about movies, like there's no truth for us to appeal to, really. It's just whatever we think the movie means, and maybe what we think the director might mean. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it goes back to just what the individual, what the viewer thinks.
Yep. I totally agree on that. I don't have to worry about somebody getting talked into being a Marxist if we're just talking about Midsommar like every other episode, when I have to hope I make a good argument for my cause, right?
Next time we'll talk about how Midsommar was an apology for Stalinism, but I won't get into that right now.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. I didn't search Midsommar on Jacobin and see what they had to say from 2 years ago, but I'm sure that's probably it was something along the lines of that. Okay. Well, I hope you guys appreciate this episode. We have 60 plus other episodes in our backlog. You can find those on YouTube or on any podcatcher. And we usually talk about politics, but we have talked about movies before. Usually it's policy, politics, and philosophy. You could find more of my content on the Obey podcast, where every now and then I'll rave about more political issues and stuff in the news. You can find more of Matt's content on YouTube as The Anti-Philosopher. He also has a podcast, which is The Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse, where he's done some like long form deep dives, criticizing, looking into certain things from all sorts of views and giving his insight there.
I have to be honest with you. In the last episode of the podcast I did, I called out ANCAPs.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I had to confess my sins. So the movie made me feel the need to confess my sins.
Well, the fact that we've done about 60 plus hours arguing with each other, it's hard for me to imagine that that this would be a new view. But you'll have to clip it for me if it is. But you're nodding your head no. So I guess I'm sure we'll argue about it in another episode. It always comes up. It's a pervasive topic. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed. And sign off is Matt and Matt. Thank you.